The War Council chamber reeked of arrogance and ozone. Commander Zara Cross stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, watching the Korthak delegation file into the massive obsidian hall. Their leader, General Vex Ironjaw, towered 9 feet tall with crimson scales that gleamed under the harsh violet lighting. His forearms bore ceremonial blades that could slice through starship hulls. Behind him, 6 lesser generals followed, each one radiating the kind of confidence that came from never losing a battle. "So," Vex rumbled, his voice like grinding stone, "the Terran Alliance sends a single human female to negotiate our surrender terms." His mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. How delightfully insulting. Zara's expression never changed. Not a twitch, not a blink. She simply stood there, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. The Korthaks shifted nervously. They weren't used to prey that didn't cower. "Actually," she said finally, her voice carrying just the right amount of silk over steel, "I'm here to accept yours." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vex's head tilted, his 6 eyes narrowing to slits. Did this pathetic creature did she just suggest we surrender to her? He looked around at his generals, who were now bristling with barely contained fury. To humans, the weakest species in known space? Weakest? Zara's lips curved into something that might generously be called a smile. "Now that's interesting. Tell me, General, how exactly did you come to that fascinating conclusion?" Vex leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the human commander. "Because, little mammal, in 300 years of conquest, we have never encountered a species so fragile, so limited, so utterly dependent on their crude technology to survive. Your bones break like twigs. Your skin tears like paper. Your lifespans are barely worth measuring." He straightened up, clearly enjoying himself. "You are biological accidents that somehow stumbled into space travel." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "Biological accidents. I like that. Mind if I share a little story with you, General?" "By all means," Vex sneered, spreading his forearms wide. "Entertain us with human folklore before we discuss the terms of your species' extinction." Zara took 3 steps forward. Just 3, but something in the way she moved made every Korthak in the room tense. It was the kind of movement that spoke of absolute confidence, the kind that predators recognized in each other. "Last month," she began conversationally, "your advance fleet encountered one of our colony ships, the Meridian, civilian vessel carrying families to a new settlement. Women, children, and elderly folks, about as defenseless as humans get." She paused, studying her fingernails with apparent fascination. "Your commander, Thex the Devastator, I believe? He was quite proud of that title." "Thex was a fine warrior," one of the lesser generals growled. "He died with honor." "Oh, he died all right," Zara agreed cheerfully. "Along with his entire fleet. 17 warships, if I'm remembering correctly. All destroyed by that one little civilian transport." She looked up, meeting Vex's gaze directly. "Funny thing about that encounter, though. According to our records, the Meridian never fired a shot. The silence that followed could have been cut with a plasma blade." Vex's eyes began to glow with that peculiar orange light that meant a Korthak was either very angry or very confused. In his case, probably both. "Impossible," he hissed. "No civilian vessel could—" "You know what your mistake was?" Zara interrupted, her tone still maddeningly casual. "You assumed that because we seem fragile, we actually are fragile. You mistook gentleness for weakness, restraint for inability." She began to pace now, her boots clicking against the obsidian floor. "The Meridian didn't fire a shot because it didn't need to. The humans aboard that ship did something far more creative." "Which was?" Vex demanded, though he was beginning to sound less certain than before. "They turned off their artificial gravity." Zara's smile was now genuinely amused. "See, we fragile humans have spent our entire evolutionary history adapting to a crushing 1G environment. Our bones are dense, our muscles are compact, and our cardiovascular systems are designed for constant struggle against gravity. Your species evolved on a moon with 1/6 standard gravity. When those colonists shut down their gray generators and went into free fall," she shrugged, "well, let's just say they became very, very fast, and very, very angry. The largest of the lesser generals, a scarred brute named Korax, slammed one of his fists on the table. "You speak in riddles, human!" "What does gravity have to do with ship-to-ship combat?" "Everything," Zara replied, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Because those colonists didn't stay on their ship. They suited up, armed themselves with whatever they could find, and came calling. 17 ships, General. They boarded and cleared 17 of your warships in less than 4 hours. In zero gravity, where you stumble around like newborns, they moved like humans in our natural element." The color was slowly draining from Vex's scales. The report said there were no survivors to question. There weren't, Zara confirmed. Funny thing about humans, General. We're actually quite peaceful by nature. We prefer negotiation to violence, cooperation to conquest, but her voice hardened like cooling metal. We have this peculiar quirk. When someone threatens our children, when someone attacks our families, when someone mistakes our mercy for weakness. She stopped pacing and faced the Korthak delegation directly. We stop being peaceful. You're lying, Vex snarled, but there was doubt creeping into his voice. Humans are weak, fragile, limited, are we? Zara reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device. It looked innocuous enough, about the size and shape of a human hand. She placed it gently on the conference table between them. This is a gravitational field generator, standard equipment on human ships. We use them to maintain 1G environments in space. She tapped the device once, and a soft hum filled the room. Right now it's set to Korthak normal. Comfortable for you, almost weightless for me. She tapped it again. The hum deepened. Immediately, every Korthak in the room staggered. Their graceful, flowing movements became clumsy and labored. Vex's forearms trembled with the effort of keeping them raised. That's Earth normal, Zara said conversationally, apparently unaffected by the increased gravity. 1 standard G. The environment I was born in, raised in, trained in. She walked around the table, moving with fluid ease while the Korthaks struggled just to remain upright. Now, imagine if I were to increase it further. Say, to the gravity of a gas giant's surface. 3 Gs, 4, 5, stop, Vex gasped, his massive frame now visibly sagging under the increased weight. Oh, this is nothing, Zara assured him. Though she did tap the device again, returning the gravity to normal. The Korthaks sucked in grateful breaths, their dignity somewhat dented. Human special forces train routinely at 5 Gs. Our pilots can function at 7 or 8 during combat maneuvers. One of our athletes actually holds a record for maintaining consciousness at 12 Gs for almost 30 seconds. She picked up the device and slipped it back into her jacket. But that's just the beginning of what makes us interesting. You see, General, when you've spent your entire evolutionary history as prey animals on a world that's actively trying to kill you, you develop certain adaptations. Prey animals? Korak scoffed, though he was still breathing heavily. You claim to be predators now? Oh no, Zara laughed, and the sound was genuinely delighted. We're not predators. We're much worse than that. She leaned against the table, casual as could be. We're persistence hunters. Do you know what that means, General? Vex's silence was answer enough. It means we don't need to be the strongest, or the fastest, or the most heavily armed, Zara explained patiently. We just need to be able to keep going when everything else gives up. We need to be able to adapt, to learn, to find a way through any obstacle. Her expression grew thoughtful. Your species conquers through overwhelming force. Very effective, usually. Shock and awe, massive firepower, quick, decisive victories. But what happens when your enemy doesn't break? What happens when they just keep coming? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. The Meridian wasn't an isolated incident, Zara continued quietly. 3 days ago, your main battle fleet engaged our 7th Defense Wing near the Proxima system. 57 of your finest warships against 12 human destroyers. Want to guess how that ended? Our ships are more advanced, Vex said weakly. Stronger hulls, better weapons, superior crews? Zara finished for him. Absolutely. Your warriors are magnificent. Honorable, skilled, bred for combat. But they expected to fight other warriors. They didn't expect to fight humans. She straightened up, her casual demeanor suddenly replaced by something infinitely more dangerous. They didn't expect to fight a species that turns asteroid belts into weapons, that uses stellar mechanics like tactical tools, that treats the vacuum of space like a natural habitat. She moved to the great window that dominated one wall of the chamber. Outside, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, beautiful and terrible and utterly indifferent to the small dramas being played out on the planets below. Your admiral, Thane Bloodsword, tried to ram one of our destroyers when his weapons failed, Zara said without turning around. Brave gesture, very honorable, but the humans aboard that ship did something your admiral probably never imagined possible. She turned back to face the delegation, her eyes reflecting the starlight. They opened the airlocks and went out to meet him, in a vacuum, in hard suits that barely qualify as armor by your standards, and they stopped his ship. By hand. That's impossible, one of the lesser generals whispered. 23 humans, Zara continued relentlessly, working together in perfect coordination, using nothing but magnetic grapples and plasma cutters. disabled a Korthak heavy cruiser in open space. Then they boarded it. Deck by deck, corridor by corridor, they cleared that ship of every warrior aboard it. Do you know how long it took them? The Korthak said nothing. They seemed to have forgotten how to speak. 17 minutes, Zara said softly. 17 minutes to turn your most advanced warship into a tomb. And when it was over, when every one of your warriors lay dead, those 23 humans sealed the breaches, restored life support, and took that ship back to our lines. They're using it now as a training vessel, teaching our children how Korthak technology works. Vex finally found his voice. What? What do you want? Zara smiled then, and it was a thing of terrible beauty. I want you to understand something, General. Humans don't want to be your enemies. We'd much rather be your friends, your trading partners, your allies. We're quite good at cooperation when given the chance. Her expression hardened again. But if you insist on treating us as prey, if you continue to mistake our desire for peace as a sign of weakness. She shrugged. Well, then you'll discover exactly what 300 years of being the galaxy's favorite victims has taught us about surviving the unsurvivable. The silence stretched on until it became painful. Finally, Vex cleared his throat. What? He asked carefully. Are your terms? Zara Cross studied the Korthak general with the same intensity as a surgeon might examine a particularly complex tumor. Vex Ironjaw sat across from her at the obsidian conference table, his 4 massive hands drumming nervously against the polished surface. His scales had shifted from their usual crimson to a duller, more uncertain shade of burgundy. Fear, she realized with grim satisfaction, looked remarkably similar across species. My terms are quite simple, she said, settling back in her chair with deceptive casualness. Complete withdrawal from all human-controlled systems. Immediate cessation of hostilities against all Terran Alliance vessels and installations. And her smile could have cut glass. A formal apology to the families of everyone who died on the Meridian. The lesser generals erupted in outrage. Korthak slammed both his primary fists on the table hard enough to crack the stone. Apology? We are Korthak! We do not apologize to prey species. We do not bow before Korthaks. Vex's voice cut through the protest like a plasma blade through paper. The scarred general fell silent immediately, though his eyes continued to burn with barely restrained fury. Vex himself never took his gaze off Zara. And if we refuse these terms? Zara's expression didn't change. Then you'll discover why the Meridian incident wasn't actually the first time humans and Korthaks have clashed. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me, General, what do you know about the disappearance of your 3rd reconnaissance fleet 6 months ago? A chill seemed to settle over the room. Vex's primary eyes narrowed while his secondary pair focused on something just over Zara's shoulder. The way Korthaks looked when they were trying to process multiple threatening possibilities simultaneously. They were investigating an uncharted system in the Outer Rim, he said slowly. We lost contact. Assumed they encountered spatial anomalies, or perhaps a previously unknown stellar phenomenon. Reasonable assumption, Zara agreed pleasantly. Space is dangerous after all. Lots of things can go wrong when you're exploring the unknown. Black holes, quantum storms, unstable wormholes. She paused, examining her fingernails with apparent interest. Or humans who really don't like unexpected visitors. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. That system, Vex said carefully, was supposedly uninhabited. Oh, it was, Zara assured him. Empty. Not a single permanent settlement. No orbital installations, no signs of civilization whatsoever. Just a small research station studying some fascinating gravitational anomalies around the local star. 12 scientists, completely unarmed, conducting boring academic research. Her smile grew wider. Your reconnaissance fleet probably thought they'd found easy prey. What happened to my ships? Vex demanded, his voice rising despite his obvious attempts to maintain composure. They asked the scientists to surrender, Zara replied conversationally. Standard Korthak protocol, right? Overwhelming display of force, demands for immediate capitulation, threats of orbital bombardment if their conditions weren't met within 1 standard hour. She tilted her head thoughtfully. The scientists politely declined. 12 unarmed researchers, Korthak snarled. Against an entire reconnaissance fleet? You expect us to believe that they won? Zara finished. Oh, they didn't just win, General. They completely embarrassed your people. You see, those weren't just any scientists. They were studying gravitational manipulation, learning how to create and control localized distortions in space-time itself. When your ships showed up, making threats, she shrugged. Well, they had some very interesting tools at their disposal. She stood up and moved to the great window again, gazing out at the stars. Human scientists have this charming habit of being extremely creative when their lives are threatened. It comes from spending most of our history getting chased around by things with bigger teeth than us. We learned to think our way out of problems that brute force couldn't solve. What did they do? Vex's question came out as barely more than a whisper. They turned your fleet inside out, Zara said simply. Literally. Created a gravitational inversion field that folded space around your ships until their outer hulls became their inner hulls. Very elegant solution, really. No explosions, no debris field to clean up afterward. Just 17 vessels that suddenly found themselves occupying the same space as their own superstructure. She turned back to face the delegation. The effect on the crews was instantaneous. The Korthak generals sat in stunned silence. Even their breathing had stopped. But that's not the really interesting part, Zara continued, returning to her seat. The interesting part is what those 12 scientists did next. They spent 3 days studying the wreckage, reverse engineering your technology, learning everything they could about Korthak ship design and tactical doctrine. Then they transmitted all that information back to Earth. Her eyes glittered with predatory satisfaction. Every weakness, every vulnerability, every single flaw in your supposedly superior warships. We've been preparing for you ever since. Vex's primary hands clenched into fists. You knew we were coming. We've known about the Korthak Empire for decades, Zara confirmed. We've been watching you conquer system after system, studying your methods, learning your patterns. Did you really think a species that survived on a dead world for millions of years wouldn't notice the galaxy's most successful predator empire expanding in our direction? She stood again, but this time she moved toward the Korthak delegation instead of away from it. Her steps were measured, deliberate, the kind of approach that made every instinct scream danger. Here's what you never understood about humans, General. We don't just adapt to survive, we adapt to win. Every challenge makes us stronger. Every threat teaches us something new. You've spent 300 years conquering species that fought you the way you expected to be fought. Honor duels, fleet engagements, traditional warfare between civilized peoples. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. We don't fight fair. No honor in such tactics, one of the lesser generals muttered. Honor? Zara's laugh was genuinely delighted. Oh, that's precious. You're lecturing me about honor while planning the genocide of my species? She shook her head in apparent amazement. Let me tell you about honor, General. Honor is protecting the innocent. Honor is standing up to bullies. Honor is making sure that anyone who threatens children pays the price for that mistake. She was close enough now that the Korthaks had to crane their necks to look up at her. Despite being barely half their height, something in her presence made the massive aliens seem small and uncertain. The Meridian was carrying 300 families, she continued softly. Children who'd never seen the sky of their new world. Parents who'd saved for years to buy passage to a better life. Grandparents who just wanted to spend their final years somewhere peaceful. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Your advanced fleet slaughtered them for sport. It was war, Vex said weakly. In war, there are always casualties. No. The single word cut through his excuse like a blade through silk. It wasn't war. War implies that both sides agreed to fight. What you did was murder. Mass murder of defenseless civilians whose only crime was being human. She leaned closer, her voice carrying the promise of terrible consequences. And now you get to find out what happens when you make enemies of a species that holds grudges for geological epochs. Vex reached for one of his ceremonial blades, the gesture more desperate than threatening. Enough words, human. If you think your soft flesh can stand against Korthak steel. His hand never reached the weapon. Zara moved faster than the eye could follow, her own hand intercepting his wrist with surgical precision. For a moment, the tableau held, the massive alien general straining against the grip of a human woman who barely came up to his chest. Then Zara squeezed. The sound of breaking bone echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. Vex's roar of pain was cut short as his wrist folded in on itself, the delicate bones crushed beyond repair. He dropped to his knees, cradling his destroyed hand against his chest. Weak, Zara said conversationally, releasing his wrist and stepping back. Fragile. Limited. She picked up his ceremonial blade, a magnificent weapon forged from some exotic alien metal that could allegedly cut through tank armor. With casual, almost absent-minded pressure, she bent it in half. Then she bent it again, twisting the once proud blade into a useless pretzel of metal. Fascinating how these words keep coming back to haunt you, isn't it? She dropped the ruined weapon on the table, where it landed with a dull clang that seemed to echo forever. You see, General, you made a classic mistake. You confused the appearance of weakness with actual weakness. Humans seem fragile because we evolved in a world where everything was trying to kill us, so we learned to look harmless to avoid unnecessary fights. We seem limited because we prefer cooperation to conquest, so we don't go around advertising our capabilities. She tilted her head, studying Vex the way an entomologist might examine a particularly interesting insect. But underneath that soft exterior, we're the descendants of persistence predators who hunted megafauna to extinction with nothing but sharpened sticks and an absolute refusal to give up. The other Korthak generals sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid to speak, afraid to do anything that might draw her attention. Their leader knelt before this small human woman, his pride as shattered as his wrist. "So let me make this very simple for you," Zara continued, her tone shifting from conversational to absolutely final. "You have exactly 24 hours to begin your withdrawal from human space. Any Korthak vessel found in our territory after that deadline will be treated as a hostile combatant and dealt with accordingly." She paused, letting that sink in. "And General, when I say dealt with accordingly, I don't mean quick, clean destruction. I mean, we'll capture your ships, study your crews, learn everything we can about how your bodies work, how your minds function, how your society operates. Then we'll use that knowledge to make sure that every future encounter between our species goes exactly the way this one has gone." She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Oh, and one more thing. That formal apology I mentioned, it's not optional. You will personally record a message of condolence for the families of every single person who died on the Meridian. You will acknowledge that their deaths were unjustified and unnecessary. You will promise that nothing like it will ever happen again." Her smile was sharp as winter starlight. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure that every species in the galaxy knows exactly how easily humans can break the mighty Korthak Empire." She reached the door and turned the handle. Just before stepping through, she called back one final time. 24 hours, General. I suggest you don't waste them." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the closing of a tomb. In the silence that followed, Vex slowly struggled to his feet, his destroyed wrist hanging useless at his side. He looked at his generals, at the twisted remains of his blade, at the empty chair where the human commander had sat. "Send the withdrawal order," he said quietly. "Sir?" Korax looked stunned. "But surely we can't simply surrender to—" "Send the order." Vex's voice carried the weight of absolute command. "And prepare the apology message." He looked down at his ruined hand, where the bones were already beginning to swell beneath the scales. "The humans are right about one thing. We made a mistake." "What mistake?" Korax asked. Vex stared at the door through which Zara Cross had departed, his mind replaying the casual, almost effortless way she had destroyed his hand and his weapon. The complete lack of strain or effort, the absolute certainty in her voice when she promised consequences. "We assumed," he said slowly, "that being the apex predator in our corner of the galaxy meant we were the apex predator everywhere." He flexed his good hand, testing the responsive muscles that suddenly felt inadequate. "We were wrong. Humans aren't prey that learn to fight back. They're predators that learn to look like prey, and now we've given them a reason to stop pretending to be harmless." He moved toward the communication console, his steps heavy with the weight of impending defeat. "Send the message," he repeated. "All ships, full retreat. Immediate withdrawal from Terran space." "And the apology, sir?" Vex looked at the twisted blade on the table, remembering the casual strength that had destroyed it. "The apology, too. Word for word, exactly as she demanded." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And pray to whatever gods you worship that they never decide we're worth hunting." Outside the chamber, Zara Cross walked calmly through the corridors of the Korthak command station, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression serene. Behind her, she could hear the frantic bustle of a military organization, suddenly coming to terms with the fact that they had picked a fight with something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. She smiled to herself as she headed for the docking bay where her shuttle waited. The smile held no warmth, no mercy, and no forgiveness. After all, humans were very good at holding grudges, and they had just been given a very good reason to hold one.